Okay, before I start, I think last time I made a small mess up of the proof of the fact that Pn is equivalent to R. So we'll leave this next time to sort it out. The place where it went wrong. If you realize where the place it went wrong, just use decimal expansion instead of binary. Or use anything other than binary expansion. Use a ternary expansion and skip what I have. Or you use a decimal or base 5 expansion. Just don't do binary, because that binary thing, the 0 and 1 are complementary to each other, and that's what created problems. Okay? I'll put it in the notes, the correct proof, but that's what I want to cover. It was a very good and well taken objection, so that can be solved. Alright, it looks like I'm taking more time to dispose of some of the set theoretic preliminaries that I want to be using on and off. I want to put them all in one place, but it's taking more that time than I really anticipated it would. That's because perhaps I'm doing it in more detail than I really wanted to. Anyway, today so maybe another 2 classes, max, I will try to compress most of the details that I want, which I will be using, and when we need something else, we will at that time cover it. So we had many things now, countably infinite sets. I think whoever invented this pen and the board must be shot down. Countably sets. I think he must have really hated his teachers and given this whole classroom. So, okay. Any set which is countably infinite is said to have cardinality Aleph. And we have seen number of uncountably infinite sets, almost all of them, whenever they are equivalent to R, we denote its cardinality by C. So now, what I want to do is somewhat meander through the arithmetic of cardinals. Because I defined the basic operations last time, but before I do this, I would like to look at 1 or 2 very simple properties. Let me see. Let me first explain. Suppose I have a set A which is countably infinite. Now by putting finite number of fellows into it, you are not going to strengthen it any further as far as infinity is concerned. What do I mean by this? So let A be a countably infinite set. Let B be any finite set. So let's even assume that B is bringing everything new. So let's assume that A section B is finite, empty. So suppose I have a huge countably infinite set, and I have something totally new but only finite, and I put it in this. It's like putting a bucket of water in the ocean. Nothing is going to change. The ocean is going to remain as an ocean. Implies the cardinality of A union B is still. This means cardinality of A is Aleph naught. And by putting this finite set, you have not in any way altered the cardinality of that set. Now it's easy to see this as follows. Already A is equivalent to a subset. Which one? Namely itself of A union. So the only thing we have to show is that A union B is equivalent to a subset of A. That's all we have to see. In fact, we will directly see that it is exactly equivalent. So what is A union B? This is all of A, and B has brought some finite number of new elements, let's suppose. Okay. So this is what A union B is. Now somehow or the other I have to map it to A in a 1-1-1. What do I know about A? A is countably infinite, so the elements of A can be arranged as a sequence A1, A2, A3, etc. Because A is countably infinite, I can arrange the elements of A as a sequence. Now what I am going to do is take only A. Now, just do the Hilbert Hotel this thing. Map B1 to A1, B2 to A2, Bn to An, and A1 to An plus 1, and Ak to. Okay. So ask all the fellows in the A hotel to move n rooms to the right side. Then make a room available for this n new fellows. So that's essentially what is going on. So A union B is equal. This association is already a 1-to-1 correspondence. So I will not write the details. Therefore, A union B equal to A, but this is cardinality Aleph not. Therefore, A union B. Right. So therefore, by throwing in a finite number of elements into a countably infinite set, it's not good. It's not exactly like giving a 10 rupees to the Karodpati. He may still take it and keep it in his pocket. They are greedy fellows. But this is an infinite Karodpati, infinite Pati. So he doesn't really, he absorbs everything. Now, this proof, the picture already suggests that instead of one finite set here, I could have put another finite set, C also. And still A union B union C would have remained the same. Because first of all, A union B would have been countably infinite. And your countably infinite set, you had another finite, same result. Again it will be countably infinite. So you can go on adding at least the finite number of finite sets to a countably infinite set, and it still remains countable. So let me just note that. You can do much more than that. But what is very trivially seen from this picture is A is countably infinite, B1, B2, Bk finite. Assume all of them are bringing in new things, all disjoint. This is for the easier case, but then when it is not disjoint, we will come back to that later. Then A union B1, union B2, union Bk is still cardinality. So you go on adding finites, nothing is going to happen. You just go on adding finite number of things to a countably infinite set. You are not going to raise the level of infinity by any means. Now, suppose therefore, if I want to raise the energy or whatever, the status of Aleph naught, I have to try something infinity. So let us try to put infinity, but smallest, I want to raise Aleph naught. What is the minimum I have to put? Suppose I put Aleph naught, nothing is going to happen. So that's the next result. A and B are both countably infinite. Suppose both are countably infinite and same disjoint. So both are countably infinite and disjoint, and look at A union B. And that still is going to be, it's not going to raise the level of infinity, if you add this, essentially that is what in the end. Whatever level of infinity you have, if you add the same level of infinity, you are not going to raise. That's a little difficult theorem to prove. Okay? We will prove it. I mean, at some stage, I will prove it. That if you add a level of infinity, we have not yet seen the arithmetic yet. We will see a little bit more. Well, even today, I will not prove it. I will demonstrate it at some level, like I left not level. But in order to raise the level of infinity, you have to raise the addition itself. What you are adding has to be of higher level. Anyway, let us stick to this. Now, again, the proof is very simple. We will just establish a one-to-one correspondence between A union B and N. That's enough. Or N and A union B. So, this is N. This is A union B. A union B consists of two parts. The A part and the B part. They are disjoint, I have taken for the time being. So, A is countably infinite. Therefore, it can be arranged in a sequence. So, A is countably infinite. So, the elements of A can be written as A1, A2, B is countably infinite. Therefore, the elements of B can be arranged as B1, B2, B3, etc. Now I have to establish a correspondence. It's easy to see through a picture. This is N. What you do is, you start taking the odd fellows to A's and the even fellows to B. So 1 goes to A1, 2 goes to B1, 3 goes to A2, 4 goes to B2, and so on and so forth. So what is the function? F of 2n minus 1 is An, F of 2n is B. That's it. Then that's clearly 1, 1 and 1, 2. And there you are finished. Okay? So F is 1, 1 and 1, 2. And therefore N is equivalent to A. And therefore they have the same cardinality. So the cardinality will be the same. Nothing is going to change. Okay? Now, if we can move from 1 to 2, we can move from 2 to 3. If I have 3 sets which are disjoint, each of it is countably infinite. The first 2 are going to be first countably infinite. Add that to the third countably infinite, still it is countably infinite. So you can make now finite number of steps. So therefore, A1, A2, A3, AK, countably infinite, disjoint. It's not, but we'll remove this disjoint later, implies union J equal to 1 to K, AJ also is countably. Now more strange is, even if we take a countably infinite number of countably infinite sets, if we increase the strength like A1, A2, A3, A4, AK, etc., etc., take a sequence of countably infinite steps, still the union is countably infinite. The next stage is, so really you got to work very hard to raise the level of infinity. But then, the one way to raise is go to the power set. An is a sequence of disjoint countably infinite sets, implies union of all these sets is also a countable. Now the proof is essentially what I did for showing that n cross n is countably infinite. So once again, I just draw the picture. An can be written as a sequence, right? Because An is a countably infinite set. So it will be An1, AN2, etc. It can be written as a sequence. Now what will be the union? The union ANs will contain all these ANKs, where n will run from 1 to infinity, k will also run from 1 to infinity. So all you have to do is a mapping. Map F union AN to n as f of a and k is equal to 2 to the n 3 to the k. That's the example I gave. So this is 1 1. We have seen this before. Therefore, union AN is equivalent to a subset of. What about the reverse? N is equivalent to A1 because A1 is countably infinite. So N is equivalent to a subset of. So N is equivalent to A1, which is a subset of union N. Therefore, Schroeder-Bernstein this is equivalent to a subset of that. That is equivalent to a subset of this. Therefore, N is equivalent to union N. Therefore, union N is still so a countably infinite union of countably infinite sets is countably infinite. That's what it means. It's not semantic quibbling or anything like that. It is not trying to beat you. It's just a correction. A countable union, because this is the number of elements there are countably infinite. So a countably infinite union of countably infinite sets is countably infinite. That is the. What we have done here so far is all the time we are assuming everything is disjoint. Because we are worried when we write like this, suppose an A1 appears here also and also appears here, we have to separate them out and all that. So we avoided that problem to start with. Now we will say that any union can be written as a disjoint union and therefore we are okay. Exercise. Yeah.
Can you explain the function?
Which function?
AN2.
This I had done before. See, what I do is the following. A11, A12, A13, etc. Then this is A1, right? The A2 set is A21, A22, A23, etc. A3 is A31, A32, A33, etc. Now I am going to map all these elements to n. How am I going to map? Where does this fellow go? 2 to the power of 1 into 3 to the power of 1. Where does this fellow go? 2 to the power of 3 into 3 to the power of 3. And all this will be distinct because of the unique factorization theorem. So therefore this type of numbers which have only 2 and 3 as a prime factor, they form a subset of the integers and we are done. Okay. What was I doing? Exercise. Okay. If A1, A2, A3, etc. should be either a finite sequence or an infinite sequence, is a sequence of sets. Okay, not necessarily disjoint. So that there exist sets B1, B2, etc. such that 1 Bj is either equal to or a subset of Aj, 2 Bj intersection Bk is empty, they are disjoint, and 3 union j equal to 1 to k, Aj is equal to union j equal to 1 to k, Bj for any k. It can be finite or infinite, doesn't matter. Equal infinity you can check. And okay, for any k or if you want, given if it's infinite, j equal to 1 to Aj. So therefore what this says is, any union can be written as a disjoint union, and the rest of the story is trivial. So therefore, wherever I had stated the properties with disjoint, you can now remove it. If you take a countably infinite set and add a finite set to it, whether it's disjoint or not, it is going to remain countably infinite. If I take a countably infinite set and add a countably infinite set to it, whether disjoint or not, it is going to remain. So all the disjointness criteria can now remove. Okay. Any question?
Is this the unique representation among disjoint sets?
It's not unique.
Representation among disjoint sets?
No. I did say, I show that there exists A. See, after all, by writing, disarraying them, rearranging them, I can get another representation, isn't it? Write A1, instead of A1, write A2 first, and do the whole process, you get a different B1, B2, B3. So it's not unique. What I am showing is that so that there exists A. If I write this, that's different. There exists unique sets B1, B2. I am not saying that. There exists A. One. Take for example, okay, just two. I can take B1 to be A1 and B2 to be just 4. Okay? Or I can take B1 to be A2 and what can I take B2 to be? From this is just so there is just not unique. Okay, so you can do it.
Satisfy first problem.
But B,
Will not satisfy the first problem.
which property?
Aj is subset of Aj.
Yeah, I'll rearrange them. I'll rearrange them, call them as this one as C1 and this as C2, C1 union C2. That's because the union is commutative, so you can rearrange them any way you like. So that's not a the union can be written in many ways as a disjoint union. But what is important is that it can be written as a disjoint union. If you want to keep the same order, then that's a different one. So I'm not talking about orders at all. Okay, now I'm getting back to the arithmetic of the cardinal numbers. It must be mentioned that most of these things are in a sense hodgepodge, because if you want to really put a solid foundation, you must first of all do set theory and proper axiomatic setup. Otherwise, many times we don't even know. We have not even defined what a cardinal number is. We have simply said with every set we associate a symbol called its cardinal number. The set n, we associate the cardinal number or left not. With the set n R, we associate the cardinal number C. The only property we are asking is any set which is equivalent to n will also get the same symbol, and any set which is equivalent to R will also get the same symbol. It's a very vague definition. Okay. Therefore, one has to be, but for this working definition is good enough for us to carry on. Okay. Otherwise, you'll spend quite a bit of time in the horror of axiomatic set theory. Right. So, let's recall the various definitions of the arithmetic that we gave for cardinal numbers. So, A, B are any two cardinal numbers. I did this towards the end of the last class. So, we have several definitions. We define the addition. This is definition. How do I define the definition addition? If A is a cardinal number, there must be a set with this as the cardinality, with this as the symbol. There must be a set B with this as the cardinal number. So, So let A and B be any two, let me put it as plus, this one is plus. Let A and B be any two. Now I am going to put disjoint sets with see, that itself is a question mark. What is the guarantee that there are two disjoint sets, one with cardinality A and one with cardinality B? You have to bit of handwork, but you have to. If you are in computing, you can show that there is no problems about that. Okay, for example, suppose I give you a cardinality A and I want to add A with A. Now I have to find two sets which are disjoint but equivalent to each other. Who guaranteed that? So there is a problem, but that's easy to get. There is no problem. When it comes to this A plus A and other things, I will demonstrate that. But right now, there are a few hand waving things that are going on here. It's tacitly assumed that this is possible. Okay? Then we define A plus B to the cardinality of A union B. Okay? This follows from the fact, from our normal addition, if you have two positive integers A and B, and if you have a set with cardinality A, another set with cardinality B, and if they are disjoint, A union B will exactly have cardinality A plus B elements. Okay? The number of elements will be A plus B. We simply generalize this. I went through this last time, so I will go through that. I'll just write this. A, B, any two cardinal numbers. Now I don't no longer read disjoint. A and B such that cardinality of A is A, cardinality of B is B. Then our experience with the positive integers told us to define A into B as the cardinality of the Cartesian product of A and B. And third, if A and B, okay, before I do the third, I will use a notation, okay?
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
So, the condition of disjoint is not required also when you say the cardinality of A plus B is A union B.
No.
Anyway, the redundant elements will be
We
removed.
should be a little bit careful. Because this will not be valid then if you are dealing with finite cardinals. So I want to make a definition which is valid for all cardinals. Okay, I have to take care of the whole world. 2 is also a cardinal number. 3 is also a cardinal number. So it must be valid in the world of cardinal numbers. So therefore, even the motivating definition itself, it is not true. Then what is the use? Okay. Where was I? Before I came to that, I wanted some notation. I don't know what notation, I don't remember what notation I used last time, but different people use different notation. Suppose I have two sets A and B. Okay. Then A to the power of B denotes, is a notation, denotes the collection of all functions from B to A. All possible functions from B to A, we denote it by A to the power of B. It's a notation. Okay. So if you want to write it, A to the power of B by notation is defined to be this. Okay. The set of all F such that F maps B to E is a function. Is a mapping which is a function. The collection of all F such that F is a function from B to E. That's the notation for that's just the notation, A to the power of B. A raised to B or A exponent B. With this notation, if A and B are any two cardinal numbers, we define again A raised to the power B by definition to be the cardinality of the collection of all these functions. That's why that notation is all over the place. That's why the collection of all functions is not. Okay? This is true in the numbers. If you have a m set and an n set, you can calculate the total number of functions, which precisely have to. Okay, suppose I had an n set here and an m set here. All this is B and this is A. So there are m elements here, there are n elements here. Now I have to define a function. For each one of these fellows here there are m choices. So there are m to the n such functions. So there are m to the n functions from B to A. Okay? That notation is what I am using for the general case. It's really very interesting exercise on combinatories. It's almost one full chapter. How to find how many of these are one-one functions, how many of these are onto functions, etc. etc. So if I give an m set and an n set, how many one-one functions are there? How many onto functions are there? How many one-one onto functions are there? And so on and so forth. Okay. But anyway, let me not. That's not my. I'm not teaching about combinatory. So I'll leave it at that. There are several such combinatorial numbers are introduced. Stirling numbers of first kind, second kind, all kinds of things will start coming into the picture there. And we'll not get into that right now. Okay. My idea is only use this notation in order to give this definition. A to the 2 plus A to the 3 is defined to be A to the 2. Okay. Now, before I do anything with these general fellows, we'll have to deal with some things that we know. The only two, the first things that we know are the finite numbers about which we claim to know everything. We are supposed to know everything. So many of these things are now trivial. In fact, these definitions are motivated by these fellows. Therefore, we go to the infinite cardinals. That's where our real understanding has to be. But the only two infinite cardinals we have seen so far are Aleph naught and C. And of course, we can talk about 2 to the C, 2 to the 2 to the C. Okay. So now we will start with Aleph naught, then go to C, then look at 2 to the C also. See, the 2 to the C, there are, this fellow will start, you will have to look at the 2 to the C also carefully in this format. It is the cardinal number 2 raised to the cardinal number C. Okay, all these matters have to be properly justified. We wrote 2 to the Aleph naught is equal to C. But on the other hand, 2 to the Aleph naught has to be interpreted as this also. The set of all functions from n to 0, 1. Okay. That those two mean the same thing, all we have to justify. But these are all not that difficult. We will come to that. We have been a little bit of abusing notations or misusing notations here, but we will sort them all out shortly. Okay. Or notations or whatever you want to call it. Symbols. Alright, so what I want to word is some strange things happen. Happen with infinite coordinates. So I'll just, to justify this point, I'll just give you two examples. One, if A and B are positive integers, then if A is any positive integer, if A is any positive integer, then A plus A cannot be equal to A. Right? That's obvious. A plus A will be 2A, twice it will become 12. But if A is an infinite cardinal, this can happen. In fact, this shall happen. But if A is an infinite coordinate, then A plus A can be. Later we say it is equal to A. Right now we will say can be equal to A. Example. So we drill to our children all this that 4 plus 4, if he writes as 4, we put it as wrong. When it comes to, if I write this, and in presence of a child who is at 8th standard or 9th standard, we say, this fellow has gone mad. He's writing A plus A equal to A. Okay, so, well, eventually he said, Judge Cantor was sent to the unity assembly. I thought he was mad. Anyway, so let me just give you, for example, now I will faithfully follow the definition of addition. Okay. Let us take, say we want to find, say Aleph naught plus Aleph naught. Now what is the definition? I have to find a set A which has cardinality Aleph naught, and I have to find another set B which is disjoint from A which has cardinality Aleph naught, take their union and show that the cardinality is the Aleph naught. Well, take A to be the odd numbers. What is the cardinality of A? Aleph naught. Cardinality of B to be the even, B to be the even numbers. Then A intersection B is empty. Cardinality of A equal to cardinality of B is equal to Aleph naught. And therefore, by definition of addition, Aleph naught plus Aleph naught is the cardinality of A union B. But what is A union B? N. So, and that is Aleph. Better. So Aleph naught plus Aleph naught is Aleph. So this could happen with the infinite cardinals. A plus A can be equal to A. Is that clear?
You have not showed this in general.
But I have not shown that in general. For to show that in general, at some form I want axiom of choice. Either Zorn's lemma or axiom of choice. Okay. Actually the Zorn's lemma version of the axiom of choice is what I want. For that I need to do some partially ordered sets and things like that. I'll do that and then come to it. I'll do the general result here. That is why I said, for example, can be. I didn't say it shall be equal to it. Okay. So there we have to watch this first. When I really prove it, I saw that it is indeed equal to it. I need a little more machinery to prove that it is indeed equal to it. I'm just saying that you see that it can happen. Secondly, for example, 1. There is 1. So we want to find C plus C. What is C? The cardinality of the real numbers. Now consider A to be this. Zero half. What is the cardinality of A? We showed that every interval is equivalent to 0, 1 and equivalent to R. So this is an interval. We also showed that any set which contains an interval is also cardinality C. So the cardinality of this is C. Now if we take B, it will be half 1. What is the cardinality of B? Same argument. Any interval is equivalent to real number, so it has cardinality C. Okay. Because any interval is equivalent to R, which we proved last time. Therefore, by definition, C plus C is the cardinality of A intersection B is empty. Nothing is common. Okay. So I have two sets, disjoint, one having cardinality C, another having cardinality C, therefore C plus C must be the cardinality of A union B by definition. But what is A union B? The interval 0. And what is the cardinality of that? C. Any interval is equivalent to R. So again, the same reason. C plus C is equal to C. So this sort of things, crazy things can happen.
So, for you to define sum of two cardinals,
Yes.
something,
Yes.
can happen that two specific sets of the same cardinal will give you two different cardinals, right?
Two.
Two
Choice
disjoint
of
sets
Yes.
of say C and C.
Mm.
Until you have a theorem which says that any two disjoint sets of cardinal C and C give an again
Yes.
C.
No,
Till then,
I'm not going to the general this thing at all. I just defined it to be that. So, oh,
Yeah, but
you are saying it's well defined.
yeah.
Okay, I mean that's what I said. Many of these things require a lot more machinery than what it is. I'm giving only intuitive definitions. Okay, you're right. But that will require a whole course on logic and foundations of set theory. If you have to go through all of them. I'm just giving you an intuitive definition here. Just tell you how these things happen. Okay, I'm not giving a course on foundations of set theory. Okay, and that will be neither I will give nor I am capable of giving it. Okay, that's much harder. Okay, where was I? Right. So therefore, this is just a demonstration, intuitive demonstration that C plus C could be equal to C. And unless don't get involved with these things in the beginning, you will be completely lost. First, make sure. But learn to ask such questions because these are all the fundamental questions that one has to keep in mind when one does. So when I define something, am I defining properly? Is it a good definition? All this you have to worry about, and therefore that's a good question. That's at the back. Oh, this has to be sorted out. I have to develop more machinery, but it can be sorted out. Okay. Right. Now you see that the same argument now be carried out by putting LF naught plus LF naught plus LF naught equal to 11. Why? How do you prove that LF naught plus LF naught plus LF naught equal to 3 times? I have to get 3 sets. What do I do?
2 part 3.
I take 0 mod 3, 1 mod 3 and 2 mod 3, those sets, and then that's over. Okay. If I want 4, 5, so any finite number of LF naughts I put, I can do it. Suppose I have a sequence of LF naughts. Did you understand what happened? Okay, suppose, okay, let me just write that. Suppose I write LF naught, I want to find this. Say k times. I want to add LF naught k times. What do I do? Like this I must get k sets. So what I do is, I take A1 to be all those sets, with all those numbers which give one remainder when divided by k. And I take A2 to be all those sets which give two to all elements which give remainder 2 when divided by 2. Then go on AK to be the set which gives what? Remainder 0. Now you do the union, it is exactly n. Each one of them is countably infinite, and apply that result, you will get that the mod A1 plus etc. plus mod AK is equal to the cardinality of j equal to 1 to k aj. Each one of them is LF naught, and this is equal to n, and therefore this is. Okay. Now suppose I put that dot. What does it mean?
Cross product.
No, I have to go to the definition of.
Okay, then what you do is 1 over n like that in the column, then like that.
1 over n. I don't know 1 over n.
Ordered pair, 1 0.
Ordered pair.
Ah.
You take
Say that.
k over n. So
Yes.
that is a sequence. It is n cross.
Okay. There are any number of ways. I mean, all you need is one map. Okay. So let me just say that here again. If you want to follow the same procedure, I will give you another. It's good. I mean, there are a number of ways. I mean, it's not just one way. Basically, the same theorem that countable infinite number, countable union of countable sets give countable. That's the same thing. But you want to use the definition, which is also a little bit questionable. I am writing dot, there's an infinite series, etc., etc. lot of confusion here. So suppose I write this, what do I mean by this? What I mean is, if I take a set with this, with a set with this, and so on, and take the cardinalities, I have to define it as the cardinality of the all the unions, and I want to show that that's equal. That sum has to be defined as the cardinality of the union, and I want to show this here. This. Now clearly, should I show this? Right. If you want to do something like this, what will you do? Can you do this anymore? I can't do mod k. Right? So therefore, I have to get very peculiar representatives for each one of these LF knots. So first, I will say, I will take A1. There is a very fundamental, simple theorem which Euclid proved long back, that there are an infinite number of primes. Okay, and that is rated as one of the most beautiful proofs. Hardy rates it as one of the most beautiful proofs in mathematics, and continues to say that there is no room for ugly mathematics. So it has to be only good math, beautiful mathematics. So that's one of the proofs. You know the proof? How Euclid proved that there are infinite number of primes? I'm not going to give it. Okay? You find out what was Euclid's proof that there are infinite. Huh? Yes. Okay. Some of you know, some of you don't know. Those of you who don't know, for the time being, pretend you know, and the first thing you do after the class is go and find out what that proof is. But don't ask the guys who know it, because they may give you a wrong proof. Then you come and ask them, after finding out, find out from them what is that proof, and say, aha, your proof is wrong. I know it. Okay? So that's the way to do it. Alright. So for example, for A1, okay, what is Euclid's theorem? It said there are infinite number of primes. Therefore, the primes can be at most countably infinite because they are part of the integers. So the prime numbers can be arranged as a sequence. Okay? The prime numbers can be arranged as a sequence. Then take A1 to be P1, P1 squared, P1 cubed, P1 to the power of n. What will be your what will be your A2? P2 squared, etc. They are distinct primes. So now what is the cardinality of each one of them? It's LF naught. Okay? And they are all disjoint. Therefore, the modulus, the cardinality of all these fellows will be less than or equal to what? N. The cardinality of n, because the union is still not covering all the integers, because 2 squared into 3 cubed is not covered in this. It is simply covered by pure single prime powers, factors. Okay? So therefore, this will be less than or equal to LF naught. But LF naught is certainly less than or equal to this, because the first fellow himself is LF naught. So together that gives LF naught. Schroeder-Bernstein theorem will give you this LF naught. There is another way of seeing. If you want to drive home the point of the theorem, the prime numbers can be brought in very effectively in some of these proofs. Okay. So LF naught plus LF naught plus LF naught, however times you add LF naught, nothing is going to happen. What about C plus C plus C plus C plus C, blah blah blah. You continue C any number of times. C, so C.
Take 0, 0, 0,
0, 1.
then 1, 2.
So what he says is, take 0, 1 for this, 1, 2 for this, etc. So the representative for this is 0, 1, for this is 1, 2, for this 2, 3 and so on. So what is the union? The union is all the way from 0 to infinity. And what is the cardinality of this? It's again C. So C plus C plus C plus C is again C. So really you have to work hard. See, that's what it means. When you are rich, to become richer is very hard. If you are a very poor fellow, if you have only 10 paisa in your pocket, within no time you can become doubly richer by adding 10 more paisa. But if you are very rich, that's why the rich fellows are always unhappy. Because they find they are not moving. They are finding it in the same place. Whereas the poor fellow is moving fast. Okay. So it's better to be poor, you are happier, you are feeling that all the time you are progressing. Whereas the rich fellow feels that he is stuck. Right.
Yeah.
Any question? Okay. Now before, let me see. I want to make some random statements now, and I want to put them all together a little later before I this thing come to the actual properties of these cardinals. Should I do it? Okay, let me now continue with some simple properties of the cardinal, then come back to this random thoughts. The first thing that we observe is that if you have two cardinal numbers A and B, it's not observed. The first thing I have to say, because it has to be proved. Okay. If you have two cardinal numbers, this I glossed over when I was trying to motivate to get to the Schroeder-Bernstein theorem. If you have two cardinal numbers A and B, either A is less than or equal to B, or B is less than or equal to A, must hold. Okay, let me first write that. It's not, it's if A and B or any two, let me explain this. It's not a trivial affair. Any two cardinal numbers, then either A is less than or equal to B, or B is less than or equal to A. What it means is any two cardinal numbers are compatible. You know partially or it says in the definitions there, you know what it means. It's a linear order or whatever terminology you want to use. Okay, if you don't want, forget about it. It's just if you give me two positive integers, either A is less than or equal to B or B is less than or equal to A. Similar thing holds for cardinal numbers. Now what does this really mean? Suppose I have the cardinal number A and its concrete realization, namely a set A which has that cardinality. And corresponding to this B, there is a set B which has the cardinal number, cardinality B. Now what this says is either A is less than or equal to B, that is A is equivalent to a subset of B. Either A is equivalent to a subset of B, that is what is meant by A is less than or equal to B, or B is less than or equal to A, B is equivalent to a subset. No, it cannot happen that neither A is equivalent to a subset of B nor B is equivalent to a subset. Remember I wrote the four possibilities. The no part cannot take place. I just dismissed it at that time. That's a theorem. Okay? That has to be proved. And that requires again some more machinery. Sometime I'll list all these machineries for those who want to. See, the thing is, there is a very horrendous fellow in set theory called the axiom of choice. And the axiom of choice looks a very innocuous axiom, the way it is looked at. But it has several equivalent versions which look so powerful, and you just throw up your hand, that all are equivalent and nothing is guaranteed. This axiom of choice is an independent axiom. The same story like the continuum hypothesis will come through that. Okay. So therefore these are all coming out of the axiom of choice. Even that A plus A is one version of the axiom of A plus A equal to A for infinite cardinals. Is one version of the axiom of choice has to be used. And one of the questions which is usually used is in many of these things is the zone's lemma. But somewhere here there is something called Tukey's lemma which has to be used. But I will indicate that later. Okay, so that's the first thing. This has to be proved. So I'm just stating them without proof. Either A is less than or equal to B, or B is less than 3. If A is less than or equal to B, and B is less than or equal to C, then now I will take some of these things which are easier to prove. Try to prove that from the definitions. What does this mean? This means you always look at it in terms of sets. Take a realization of this, take a realization of this, take a realization of this. This says there is A is equivalent to a subset of B. This says B is equivalent to a subset of C. You have to prove that A is equivalent to a subset of C. Okay. So that's all there is to it. You have to hook up that the subset instance. So in other words, what is this property called? Antisymmetry. Isn't it? This is antisymmetry. This is symmetry, and of course this is transitivity, and of course it's reflexive. A is less than or equal to. A is equivalent to a subset of itself, namely itself. So A is less than or equal to A. So it's some kind of it's a partial order. It's a total order because of the first one. If you know this terminology, but if not, I will come back to them shortly. Alright. If you have two positive numbers, suppose I have certain amount of money and you have certain amount of money, and my money is smaller than his, and somebody comes and gives equal amount of money to both of us, we still maintain the same inequality. That's what the next one. So let's prove the cardinal numbers. So what is the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? A, B, C cardinal numbers. A less than or equal to B implies A plus C less than or equal to C. Even this is these are all easy. A less than or equal to B implies A plus C less than or equal to C. Try to prove this. Again, get a realization of A as a set, realization of B as a set, realization of C as a set, and work with those sets. Less than or equal to meaning and so on and so forth. Okay. Then, all the standard properties, addition is commutative. If A and B are cardinal numbers, A plus B equal to B. Is that hard?